Modern crime scope refers to the study and coverage of contemporary criminal activities, including sophisticated methods, digital evidence, forensic breakthroughs, psychological profiling, and investigative techniques used to solve complex cases in today's world. Bryan Kohberger's name is now etched in Idaho's darkest headlines, but the crime scene photos reveal secrets even he couldn't fully control. Each shadow, each moved object, tells a chilling story of methodical planning and a mind obsessed with deception. Idaho Falls had always been a place where everyone knew their neighbors, where children played safely in yards, and where the streets were quiet long after sunset. Crime was almost unheard of, and the idea of a violent act happening in the heart of the town seemed impossible. That illusion of safety was shattered one crisp autumn morning when a local college student, walking past a small rental house near the edge of town, noticed something that stopped them in their tracks. The front door, usually locked and unremarkable, was slightly ajar. Curiosity mixed with a sense of unease, and the student cautiously looked inside. What they saw made their stomach turn. 4 bodies lying in what had been a normal, lived-in home just hours before. Panic surged as the realization hit that a terrible crime had occurred, and the student immediately called the authorities. When police arrived, they quickly cordoned off the area, their faces grim as they began the meticulous work of documenting the scene. Yellow tape stretched across the quiet street, drawing the attention of neighbors who gathered nearby, whispering in disbelief. Windows that had been closed the night before were now broken, yet there were no clear signs of forced entry. The scene was terrifying, not only for the brutality of the act, but for its utter mystery. Every piece of furniture, every small object in the home seemed ordinary. Yet each one held secrets that investigators would spend hours uncovering. Forensic teams worked methodically, photographing every corner of the house, carefully collecting items that might provide clues. A chair was overturned near the living room as though a struggle had taken place there. A lamp had been knocked off a side table, leaving a trail of glass on the floor. Even the smallest details, the position of a shoe, a scuff mark on the carpet, a faint fingerprint on a doorknob, were carefully noted. Investigators knew that in cases like this, every minor detail could be crucial. The town was paralyzed with fear. Parents held their children closer, and neighbors whispered about the horror that had invaded their peaceful streets. News crews arrived, broadcasting images of the yellow tape, the house, and the quiet street where such violence had occurred. The community struggled to make sense of what had happened, searching for answers in a place that had never seen anything like it before. Detectives pored over the evidence, each photograph revealing more than initially apparent. Shadows cast in corners suggested movement before the crime was discovered. Marks on the furniture indicated a struggle that was both chaotic and deliberate. It was clear to the investigators that the perpetrator had planned the act with care. Yet there were elements that suggested randomness, as if the intruder had been toying with the scene, leaving just enough to confuse anyone trying to understand what had happened. Even as authorities worked tirelessly, the sense of shock lingered in the town. People who had once felt safe now looked over their shoulders, wondering how someone could commit such an act in the very heart of their community. The discovery of the bodies was just the beginning. The true mystery lay in uncovering the who, why, and how behind the murders, a task that would demand every ounce of skill, patience, and attention to detail from the detectives who had been called to unravel a nightmare that seemed almost unimaginable. As the crime scene photos were reviewed in the weeks following the discovery, investigators began to notice details that had gone unnoticed during the initial examination. At first glance, the images seemed ordinary, merely documenting the horrifying scene inside the rental home. But as forensic experts zoomed in, rotated angles and enhanced shadows, subtle clues started to emerge. A window latch, previously assumed to be untouched, showed signs of tampering, tiny scratches along the metal that suggested someone had forced it open without leaving obvious evidence. The angle of the living room chair was off, as if it had been moved deliberately, possibly to provide cover for someone climbing or hiding. Each photo seemed to tell a different story. On the kitchen counter, a glass lay abandoned, its fingerprints faint but distinct. Forensic analysts ran the prints through databases, but none matched the victims. The discovery was significant. It meant that an unknown presence had been inside the house, carefully moving among the family without drawing attention. Shadows in corners revealed patterns of movement that no one had noticed in real time. The photographs captured angles and lighting that allowed experts to reconstruct a timeline of the intruder's actions, piece by piece. Even mundane items suddenly took on new meaning. A small rug was slightly wrinkled, indicating it had been stepped on in a way that suggested someone was hiding beneath or behind it. A bookshelf appeared unbalanced, with one corner pushed forward slightly, hinting at a person using it as support or perhaps as a marker to navigate the space. The photos offered a frozen record of every minor disturbance, but understanding them required patience and careful attention to detail. The more investigators studied the images, the more they realized the meticulous nature of the crime. It was not a chaotic act of violence, but one executed with careful planning. The intruder had left intentional misdirection, placing objects in ways that suggested multiple people might have been involved, though forensic evidence pointed to only one. The house itself seemed to have been turned into a puzzle, with clues hidden in plain sight. Forensic psychologists examined the photos to understand the mindset of the perpetrator. Certain movements, the careful placement of items, and the way the scene was staged all suggested someone with a methodical, almost obsessive approach. The photos revealed details that even seasoned detectives might have missed if they had relied solely on memory or field notes. Each image became a piece of evidence that told its own story, contributing to a larger picture of how the crime had been carried out. By the end of the review, the investigators had pieced together a chilling portrait. The intruder had not only committed the murders, but had manipulated the environment to confuse anyone who tried to make sense of it. The photographs were no longer just documentation. They were a window into the mind of a careful and calculating criminal. Every shadow, every moved object, and every faint fingerprint became part of a complex map, one that investigators would follow as they tried to unravel the mystery behind the Idaho murders. As investigators sifted through evidence and examined the photographs in greater detail, suspicion began to focus on Bryan Kohberger. His name had surfaced through digital footprints and surveillance near the area around the time the murders occurred. Authorities discovered he had been in the town days before the incident, his movements documented through gas station cameras and cell phone location data. At first, nothing about his outward appearance or behavior suggested violence. Friends and acquaintances described him as quiet, methodical, and highly intelligent. A young man who seemed ordinary, even predictable. That normality made the sudden association with such a brutal crime even more unsettling. Kohberger's background in criminal psychology added a chilling layer to the case. His studies had given him insight into patterns of human behavior, how investigators think, and how evidence is analyzed. Authorities worried that if he were involved, he could anticipate investigative steps, leaving minimal traces while manipulating the scene to mislead law enforcement. Every crime scene photo was scrutinized with this in mind. Analysts began looking for patterns that mirrored tactics described in psychological research, noting subtle details that might indicate the work of someone familiar with crime scenes and forensic methodology. The more investigators pieced together Kohberger's movements, the more disturbing the picture became. Security footage placed him near the home multiple times in the days leading up to the murders. Digital evidence suggested he had been researching the neighborhood, noting entry points and observing residents without arousing suspicion. Even mundane behaviors like stopping at a coffee shop across the street now seemed calculated, as though he was studying the area for a purpose no one could yet comprehend. Despite mounting evidence, authorities faced challenges. Kohberger had no prior record of violent behavior, no history that would have predicted such an act. This created a tension between instinct and proof. Detectives were convinced of his potential involvement. But the absence of a clear, direct link forced them to dig deeper into every photograph, every trace of movement, and every minor discrepancy in the crime scene. Each photo was analyzed anew, searching for fingerprints, overlooked objects, or subtle signs of intrusion that could definitively connect him to the murders. As weeks passed, a pattern began to emerge. Certain marks in the home, the careful placement of objects, and the sequence of events reconstructed from the photos all hinted at someone with specialized knowledge, someone capable of blending into normal surroundings while executing a meticulous plan. Authorities began to view Kohberger not only as a suspect, but as someone who might have approached the crime as an experiment in control, a puzzle to be solved by the careful manipulation of evidence and environment. The emergence of his name transformed the investigation from a search for an unknown intruder into a psychological hunt. Detectives realized they were no longer merely analyzing a crime scene. They were attempting to understand the mind of a potential killer, to anticipate his moves and uncover patterns he may have tried to conceal. Each photograph, each fingerprint, and each overlooked detail was now a piece of a larger, more frightening puzzle, one that pointed toward a suspect who was at once ordinary and terrifyingly methodical. Just when investigators thought they had a clearer understanding of the case, new evidence surfaced that shifted everything. A previously overlooked security camera from a neighbor's home captured movement in the shadows outside the rental property hours before the murders occurred. The footage was grainy, the figure difficult to identify, yet its movements were deliberate and strange. The person moved cautiously, avoiding light and staying close to walls, almost as if aware of being watched but confident in their plan. Analysts enhanced the footage, examining every frame for clues, but the image only deepened the mystery. The silhouette was human in shape, yet there was something unnerving about the way it moved, precise and almost ritualistic, as though the person had rehearsed every step. Forensic teams immediately revisited the crime scene photos, cross-referencing them with the new footage. Suddenly, small details that had seemed insignificant now held new meaning. A small smudge on a window, previously thought to be dust, appeared to match the angle of a hand seen in the shadows. A faint imprint on the carpet aligned perfectly with the path the figure had taken outside. It became clear that the intruder had been careful not to leave obvious signs, yet the combination of camera footage and photographs revealed a meticulously planned approach. Investigators realized that the staging inside the home had been intentional. Objects had been moved to mislead them, suggesting multiple perpetrators when evidence pointed to a single person. Items were placed to create false narratives, to confuse and frustrate those trying to reconstruct the crime. Each detail, from the overturned furniture to the misaligned rugs, now made sense in a chilling new context. The intruder was not just committing a crime, they were crafting a story for investigators to follow, and the narrative was designed to misdirect at every turn. As the team delved deeper into the photographs, a psychological profile began to emerge. The intruder's attention to detail and control over the environment suggested not only intelligence, but an obsession with manipulating outcomes. Every action seemed calculated to challenge law enforcement, to demonstrate power over both the victims and the investigators. Even minor gestures, like the placement of a personal item or the disturbance of a small piece of furniture, reflected careful thought and purpose. This revelation changed the tone of the investigation. Detectives were no longer merely collecting evidence. They were decoding a puzzle left behind by a highly methodical individual. Each photograph and piece of video footage became a map, guiding them through the steps the intruder had taken before, during, and after the murders. The new security camera evidence, combined with previously collected photographs, painted a portrait of someone who could plan with patience and precision, who understood how to manipulate perception and leave clues while remaining largely undetected. The twists in the investigation left the team both frustrated and driven. Every layer of evidence revealed another layer of calculation. What had initially seemed like random chaos was now a carefully constructed plan, one that demanded investigators anticipate the next move. The realization that the perpetrator had thought several steps ahead, almost as if playing a game against law enforcement, intensified the urgency to solve the case. The shadows in the photographs and video were no longer abstract. They were the footprints of a mind intent on outsmarting everyone, and every new detail brought investigators closer to understanding the full, chilling scope of the crime. The final review of the crime scene photographs brought the investigation to its most intense and revealing stage. After weeks of painstaking analysis, every image, every shadow, every minor detail was examined for what it might reveal about the perpetrator. Investigators began to notice patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Subtle traces of deliberate actions that painted a chilling portrait of the person responsible. The victim's positions, the angle of furniture, even the faint marks on the walls were no longer random. They told a story of control, precision, and cold calculation. A small, overlooked item became the turning point in the case. Among scattered objects in the living room, a single piece of clothing that had slipped under a sofa cushion contained microscopic traces of DNA. When analyzed, it linked directly to Bryan Kohberger, confirming what the evidence had long suggested, but could not definitively prove. Fingerprints on the window latch and smudges on glassware, once dismissed as minor anomalies, were re-examined in light of this discovery. The combination of DNA, fingerprints, and careful reconstruction of movement left no doubt. The meticulously calculated murders had a single orchestrator. Forensic experts reconstructed the timeline of the night with unprecedented clarity. From the moment the intruder approached the home to the execution of the murders, every step was deliberate. The staging of the scene, designed to mislead investigators, now became a testament to the perpetrator's methodical mind. Chairs and rugs, once thought moved in haste, were revealed to be strategically placed to control movement and visibility. The placement of objects that had suggested multiple assailants now underscored the cunning of a single individual intent on manipulation. Each photograph served as a guide, revealing not just what happened, but how the mind behind it had operated. The town of Idaho Falls, once tranquil and safe, was left to process the shock of the truth. The quiet streets that had seemed so ordinary were now marked by the knowledge that someone capable of meticulous planning and cold execution had walked among them. The discovery of the key photographic evidence, combined with forensic breakthroughs, provided closure to the investigation but did little to erase the unease lingering in the community. The case became a stark reminder of how appearances could deceive and how ordinary surroundings could conceal extraordinary darkness. For investigators, the resolution of the case was both a relief and a somber reflection on the complexity of human behavior. The photographs, once static records, had become a window into the mind of a killer. They revealed not only the crime itself, but the intelligence and patience that had enabled it. Every shadow, every minor disturbance, every overlooked detail contributed to a narrative that was now complete. Bryan Kohberger, a seemingly ordinary individual, had planned and executed the murders with chilling precision. In the end, the final revelation was unsettling, yet definitive. The photographs that had seemed to simply document a tragedy became the key to understanding it. They uncovered the meticulous methods, the deliberate misdirection, and the single mind behind the horrific act. For Idaho Falls, the nightmare had ended with justice, but the memory of the murders and the meticulous mind that orchestrated them would linger forever. A reminder that darkness can sometimes hide in the most ordinary places, waiting to be revealed through careful observation and relentless pursuit of the truth.